So once a grouchy old priest was teaching a catechism class, and he wanted to help the youngsters to understand what a Christian was. So he asked them a question. He asked, "Why do people call me a Christian?" There was a moment of silence, and then one of the boys said, "Maybe it's because they don't know you." Moses and Jesus wanted us to have hearts committed to God. Moses is speaking to the Israelites as they're about to enter the promised land. They've spent 40 years of wandering in the desert, and this was a time when they were led by God and when their faith was tested and grew. And Moses tells them that they're at a crucial point in their history, and they must pause to reflect on their past and their future. Moses is inviting the people to consider not only their physical journey, but their spiritual journey as well. And he tells them to reflect on the God who's been with them and brought them to this point. And once again, as he did at Sinai, he's placing God's law before them and offering them another chance to choose God and God's ways for their lives. God's law isn't meant to be narrow and restrictive, Moses suggests to the people. Rather, observing the statutes and decrees will make them a wise and intelligent people, admired by all the other nations. And more, their greatness will reflect the God they have. It will announce to others that their God is close to them and available to them in prayer. The local gods of the other nations were demanding and instilled fear in their devotees, even requiring human sacrifice. So Moses said, "For what great nation is there that has God so close to it as the Lord, our God, is close to us whenever we call on God?" Moses wants the Israelites to have a chance to draw on their past experiences of God and to choose to stay with the God who has given them life. And if they do, they renew their commitment to God, and they have the obligation to live according to God's ways. Then there will be a people admired by all, not because of their own gifts and abilities, but because of the great God who has chosen them and blessed them in wisdom's path. So, their commitment to God comes with an obligation to follow God's ways. And this is an important point, it's an important principle to remember. With their commitment to God comes this obligation to follow God's ways. In South Africa, we have a Bill of Rights which comprehensively protects the rights of all South Africans. And what we need to remember is that with every right, human right, comes an obligation as well. If I have a right to life, then I have the obligation to protect and defend the lives of others. Now, sadly, there are some people who spread misinformation and lies about the COVID-19 vaccination. I simply don't understand it, but they don't want to get vaccinated and they try to persuade other people not to get vaccinated. As Catholics, we have a moral obligation to get vaccinated for the common good. We are pro-life, which means we want to protect the lives of unborn babies. And so we also have the obligation of protecting the lives of the poor, people with limited access to medical help, the aged, people with comorbidities. And we protect these people by getting vaccinated. That's how we get that protection. And so people are dying because of our failure to get vaccinated. And getting vaccinated is an act of love. It's an act of charity. And so I encourage us all to live out our moral obligation and to get vaccinated as soon as possible. Now, the people of Israel made the commitment to follow God's ways. To help them interpret and apply the law, the people would need guidance. The ones who fulfilled this role were the priests, the Levites, and the scribes. A century or two before Christ, the first Pharisees emerged. They became famous for their faithful interpretation and observance of the law, and they tried to do their best to adapt the law to new political, religious, and cultural situations. And what they were trying to do is to build a protective barrier around the law to protect the people from the temptation to abandon God. And this protective barrier consisted of the observances and the rituals. Their intentions were noble, but of course, some got carried away. The Pharisees are often shown as the bad guys in the gospel. Almost every time they are around, they are a cause for conflict with Jesus. But we need to give them their due. They seem to be sincere in the questions they pose to Jesus today about ritual purity. You see, the surrounding non-Jewish world was very tempting to even faithful Jews. And what helped the Jews keep faithful to God were deliberate and constant reminders in their daily lives with such things like ritual washings. By observing them and other daily rituals, they could express and be reminded that they had a specific religious identity. They were members of the chosen people. So, concerning ritual washings, we're not talking about a person's hygienic practices. We're talking about the expressions of their religious commitment. Excuse me. Jesus wasn't critical of all the Pharisees, for like them, he also loved the law and God's covenant expressed in the law. But Jesus wanted to lead the people to the heart of the law, the relationship it fostered with God. So he wasn't concerned with tiny details, the scrupulous observance of externals, which had no meaning for an ordinary Jew. Instead, he wanted to show how to follow God, not in superficial ways, but in the deepest parts of our hearts, where we love, where we make our commitments. Jesus, Moses, in fact, all the great religious leaders urge us to practice true religion, not just rituals and external observance, but it's from the heart. Now, Jesus isn't cancelling out the importance of acts of piety and external religious behavior, but he does dismiss a holiness which is based on food laws and ritual cleansings. You see, if a person's heart is in God and with God, then one's acts will be pure, whether one attends to the proper ritual washing. And so the Pharisees very felt threatened by Jesus because his teachings and his manner of life showed that for him, holiness didn't have anything to do with superficial rituals. Jesus wants a heart turned to God. And if that happens, then the person will reflect holiness. And holiness means that before God, they are clean. So how does Jesus' words make us feel today when we are sitting in the benches in worship? And just because we are at church doing the proper thing or watching Mass on YouTube or doing our Sunday church at home, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't get our hearts checked out, because we want to sincerely try to live during the week the faith that we are professing today. We want our hearts to reflect Jesus' heart in his love of God and of his passion to do God's will. We want to look out in the world with our eyes influenced by our cleansed hearts, to feel compassion for those ignored by cold hearts of our society today. We want our hearts to be touched by the forgiveness Jesus offers us, and then to offer that forgiveness to those who have offended us.